I never thought that at 74 I would be starting my life all over again. Every morning when I look in the mirror at my wrinkled face, my thin gray hair in a neat bundle, I see not only the marks of my years, but also years of patience, which, as it turns out, has brought me nothing but disappointment. My name is Enid Trimble. I was born in the year 1950 in the small town of Wheatland. I spent my whole life here, raised my daughter Violet here, and before that I clerked at the local courthouse for 37 years. I have seen so many people's stories, so many destinies broken and saved by a judge's decisions, that sometimes I feel as if I have lived more than one life. My husband Edgar died 12 years ago. A heart attack took him suddenly, one foggy October morning. He worked for the Postal Service, delivering letters and packages all over town, knew every street, every house. We lived together for 41 years. I can't say it was a perfect marriage. We had our difficulties, our quarrels, but we respected each other. Most importantly, Edgar never made me feel guilty for just existing, unlike my daughter Violet. She's 46 now and has been married to Hugh Pell for 18 years. They have no children. Violet has always said that her career is more important to her. She works as a public relations specialist for a large pharmaceutical company. Always ambitious, always striving for something more than our little wheatland could offer her. But for some reason, she never left. Hugh owns a small estate agency, 3 staff, small office on the high street. He's 4 years younger than Violet, always smiling, but his eyes remain cold. You know, people like that, friendly on the surface, but on the inside, it's different on the inside. I noticed it right away when Violet first brought him to our house. "What a lovely house, Mrs. Trimble," he said then, looking around as if he were already estimating its value in his mind. "Just Enid, please," I said. "Enid," he repeated with the same plastic smile. "You know, this neighborhood is very valuable right now. I knew that. Of course I knew. When Edgar and I bought this house in the 70s, it was a bargain. Nobody wanted to live that far from downtown. But as time went on, the city grew, and our once suburban neighborhood became the heart of Wheatland." "Mama, don't start," Violet said, even though I hadn't started anything. It was always like that with my daughter. She didn't hear what I said, but what she wanted to hear, or maybe what she expected to hear, like I was always ready to judge her. After Edgar died, Violet began to show more and more interest in my house. At first, it was cautious suggestions. "Mom, it's hard for you to run a house this big all by yourself. Why don't you sell it and buy a smaller place?" "Why?" I asked. "I like my house. Besides, it's where all my memories are." She rolled her eyes just like when she was a kid and didn't get what she wanted. "You can take the memories with you, Mom, and you could use the money from the sale of the house." But the thing is, I didn't need the money. My pension, though small, covered all my expenses. I was used to living modestly. I had savings that Edgar and I had been saving for a lifetime of serious spending. As the years went by, Violet's innuendos became less and less subtle. 2 years ago, she asked me outright if I wanted to sign the house over to her. "It'd be easier on the inheritance, Mom. You won't have to pay taxes later." I looked at my daughter and didn't recognize her. When did she turn into this calculating, money-obsessed woman? Had she always been like that and I just hadn't noticed? "The house is in my name, Violet," I said then, "and it will be mine as long as I live." "You're so selfish, Mother." She was furious. "Always thinking of yourself." It's funny how easily children turn reality upside down. All my life, I've only ever thought of others, my husband, my daughter, my job. Even now, retired, I drive 3 times a week to Sunset Nursing Home in a neighboring town to help those less fortunate than me. I read books to those who can no longer see, write letters at dictation for those whose hands are too shaky to hold a pen. Betty Norris, one of Sunset's regular residents, often says to me, "I need you're a real angel. You come to us when you could be enjoying your freedom." But that's the thing, I enjoy these visits. I like being needed. I like seeing the gratitude in these people's eyes. I like knowing that my presence makes their lives just a little bit better. Something I don't see in my own daughter's eyes. It's gotten worse in the last year. Hugh, who had always stayed out of Violet's and my disagreements, suddenly became actively involved in the negotiations, as he called it. Enid, you have to understand, he said in his professional tone. This house is your biggest asset, and real estate prices are higher than ever. I understand, Hugh, I replied, but I'm in no hurry. The market could change at any moment, he insisted, and then you'll miss your chance. What chance? I asked. A chance to do what? To sell my house and what? Where would I live? With us, of course, Violet interjected. We could remodel the guest room, or you could buy a small apartment nearby. But I knew exactly what was really behind those offers. They didn't want me to live with them, and they certainly weren't going to help me buy a new apartment. They just wanted my house. A house that was now worth, in their estimation, a real fortune. I have no desire to move, I said firmly every time the subject came up. And each time Violet's response was the same, a resentful silence that could last for weeks. It used to hurt, and I'd call her and try to make up. But now I don't care. Maybe it came with age. This realization that some relationships aren't worth the effort you put into them, that sometimes it's better to let go than to keep clinging to an illusion. Over the past few months, I've watched Violet and Hugh become even more persistent. They came every Sunday as if on schedule, with plastic smiles and ready-made phrases. Mom, you look tired. You need more rest. Enid, have you noticed the roof is starting to leak? It's going to be an expensive repair. Maybe it's time to think about the future. The last time they came over, I couldn't stand it. Tell me straight, I asked, looking them in the eye. Do you want me to sell the house and give you the money? They looked shocked. Not at my suggestion, no, that I had dared to say it out loud. Mama, Violet exclaimed. How can you say such a thing? We're worried about you. Of course you are, Enid, Hugh said. Your welfare is our main concern. I looked at them. My daughter with her dyed brown hair and expensive manicure, her husband with his ironed shirt and cufflinks that probably cost more than I earned in a month of court work. And suddenly I realized clearly, they don't see me. To them, I am not a person with my own wants and needs. I'm an obstacle to the house they already think is theirs. That night, after they left, I sat in the living room chair for a long time, looking at the old photographs on the walls and thinking about how strange life is. About how the people you love most in the world can hurt you the most, and how hard it is to admit to yourself that your own daughter doesn't see you as a mother, but only as a means to get what she wants. I didn't cry. There were no tears left, only emptiness and a strange calmness, as if I had finally seen the truth I had tried to ignore for so long. I woke up with a heavy head and a scratchy throat. At first, I thought I hadn't slept well, but as soon as I tried to get out of bed, I realized it wasn't fatigue. My body felt like lead, and every movement required incredible effort. When I got to the bathroom, I saw my reflection in the mirror-red eyes, pale skin, sweat on my forehead. Just what I needed, I muttered, pulling a thermometer out of my locker. 38 and 3. Not critical, but enough to know I was sick. At my age, any cold could have serious complications. The doctors always warned me about that. I took an antipyretic, made myself some tea with honey and lemon, wrapped myself in a warm blanket, and settled down in a chair in the living room. The flu had crept up on me. Yesterday, I'd been feeling quite normal, driving to Sunset, helping Betty write a letter to her grandson in Oregon. Today, I could barely keep my eyes open. By noon, the temperature had risen to 39. My skin felt like it was burning, my thoughts were confused, and my eyes were a blur of color. I realized I needed help. At other times, I would have done it on my own, but now I felt my strength leaving me with each passing hour. My phone lay on the coffee table. I reached for it, my hands shaking. Who to call? Neighbors at work, most friends my age, were either no longer with us or needed help themselves. Mentally, I went over names, but each time I came back to one, Violet. Despite our differences, she's still my daughter. She should help at a time like this, right? Mom? Her voice sounded surprised when she finally answered after the 5th ring. Is something wrong? You never call during business hours. I didn't bother reminding her that I had called more than once. She just didn't always pick up. I'm sorry, honey. My voice sounded hoarse, weak. I'm sick. I think it's a bad flu. The high fever won't go down, and I feel really bad. A second silence on the other end of the line. Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. I could really hear the concern in her voice. Have you called a doctor? No, not yet, but I'm having a hard time coping on my own. Could you come over tonight to help me? Another pause, then the sound of a chair being pushed back, as if she were getting up from her desk. Sure, Mom. I'll finish my work and come over. 6 o'clock, okay? Relief came over me in a warm wave. It means that all is not lost between us. She was there for me in a time of need. Thank you, darling. I'll be waiting. After talking to Violet, I felt a little better, although physically I felt worse. I forced myself to take another antipyretic pill, some broth that was left over from yesterday, and lay down on the couch. I didn't have the strength to go upstairs to the bedroom. I fell into a slumber, then woke up with a coughing fit. Time dragged unbearably slowly. Outside the window, it was beginning to get dark, the early winter twilight enveloping Wheatland. 6 o'clock came and went, and still no Violet. At 7 p.m., when I was beginning to worry, the phone rang. Her name popped up on the screen. Violet? My voice sounded weak. Mom, I'm sorry, I can't make it tonight, she said quickly, her voice a mix of guilt and annoyance. Hugh has an important client party I completely forgot. It's very important to his business, you understand. I lay there holding the phone to my ear, and I felt something finally break inside me. It was as if the last thread that bound me and my daughter together had thinned to the breaking point and finally failed. Of course I understand, I said in a lifeless voice. Don't worry. I'll be there tomorrow, I promise, she added quickly. Don't you want to call a doctor or an ambulance? It's all right, Violet. I'll be fine. You sure? I could hear the relief in her voice. She had permission not to feel guilty. Well, call me if you need anything. Anytime. Sure. I hung up the phone and closed my eyes. The house was quiet, with only the old clock on the wall counting down the seconds. Tick-tock, 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 like a reminder that my time was running out, leaving alone. I didn't cry. Strangely, there were no tears. Just the emptiness and clarity that comes with the realization that you are all alone in the world. It was a rough night. My fever was up and down. I thrashed around on the couch, throwing off the comforter when it was hot and wrapping myself in it when the chills started to shake. I tried to get up a few times to get a drink of water or take my medicine, but each time I felt so dizzy that I had to sink back down. At some point, I got really scared. My heart was pounding in my chest and my breathing was heavy, intermittent. What if I die here, alone? The thought came suddenly and froze in my mind. No, it wasn't the mere fact of death that frightened me. At my age, I had long since gotten used to the idea that my journey was coming to an end. It was the loneliness, that no one would hold my hand in my final moments, that Violet would find me, maybe days later, when she finally deigned to come. That thought gave me my strength back. I didn't want to end like this. Not like this. Not now. Not in this house that had become a mute witness to the destruction of my relationship with my only daughter. With great effort, I forced myself to sit up, then stood up. Clinging to the walls, I made my way to the kitchen, poured some water, took another pill. The phone was left in the living room, and I realized I couldn't go back for it. But there was a landline in the kitchen next to the refrigerator, an old-fashioned one with a disc that Edgar and I had installed years ago. I was about to pick up the phone, dial 911 when I froze. Who am I kidding? Yeah, an ambulance is coming. They'll probably take me to the hospital. And then what? Back to this empty house where I'll slowly fade away, waiting for my daughter's infrequent visits, which she'll see as a burdensome chore? I leaned on the countertop and allowed myself to imagine the alternative. What if I broke out of this vicious cycle? What if instead of clinging to the past, to this house, to the illusion of a family relationship with Violet, I started something new? The thought seemed insane. Starting over at 74? Where would I go? What would I do? But the more I thought about it, the more appealing the idea seemed. I had a pension, savings, and there was the house, which was now worth a fortune, as Violet and Hugh kept reminding me. I could sell it, but not to them. I could go to the coast I'd always dreamed of, rent or buy a small apartment. Maybe even make some new friends, people who would really need me. Dizziness came over me in a new wave, and I slumped into a kitchen chair. For now, they were just fever dreams, born of sickness and resentment, but the very thought of being able to make a difference suddenly gave me strength. I sat in the kitchen until dawn, falling into slumber or waking with coughing fits. When the first rays of sunlight peeked through the window, my temperature finally began to drop. I felt weak, but my head was clear. Making my way back to the couch, I turned on the TV, just to hear human voices. The morning news was on. The anchorwoman with the perfect hair was talking about some political scandal, then the weather, then a new exhibit at the city gallery. I didn't listen, just let the words flow around me, giving me the illusion that I wasn't alone. At 10 o'clock in the morning, the phone rang. I was already feeling a little better, so I was able to reach it. "Mom, how are you?" Violet's voice sounded concerned. "Better," I answered briefly. "It was so late last night when we got back from the party that I decided not to call so I wouldn't wake you," she explained hurriedly. "Hugh and I are going over to your place now. Is there anything we need to bring? Medication? Food?" I thought for a moment. How do I feel now? Relief? Gratitude? No. Just tiredness and a strange indifference. "There's no need to worry," I said. "I'm better now. And I have everything." "But Mom, really, Violet, I'll be fine." "Are you sure?" There was doubt in her voice, but I knew my daughter would be happy not to go. She always had better things to do. "I'm absolutely sure. Enjoy your Sunday." Finished talking, I continued to sit, phone in hand, and staring into the void in front of me. It's strange how illness sometimes clarifies one's thinking. Or maybe it was about that night spent alone with thoughts that I could have died, and no one would even know about it until the morning, or until the next day, or the week after. I thought about my life with Violet, how she was such a bright, cheerful child when she was a baby, how I read her bedtime stories, how I took her to the park on weekends, how I helped her with her homework. Where and when did we lose that connection? When did my little girl turn into this cold, calculating woman for whom her husband's business party is more important than her own mother's health? Maybe it's my own fault. I allowed too much, demanded too little, or on the contrary, expected too much, pressured by my expectations. Whatever the reasons, the result was obvious. We became strangers to each other. And that night, spent in fever and loneliness, became for me the last straw, the moment of epiphany. I realized that I couldn't and wouldn't go on living like this. Something had to change. And it was at that moment, sitting on the couch with my phone in my hands and tea cooling on the table, that I made the decision that would change the rest of my life. The disease receded slowly. I felt weak for a few more days, but my fever was gone, and I gradually returned to my normal rhythm of life. Only now that rhythm seemed meaningless to me, empty, like I was just counting down the days, expecting nothing from the future. Violet didn't call back or show up that day or the next. The third day after we talked, I dialed her number myself, not because I needed help, but just to see if she even remembered I existed. "Mom, I'm sorry I don't have time." Her voice sounded irritated. "Hugh and I have a vacation in 3 days, and I have to close all the work issues before we leave." "Vacation?" I questioned. "Where are you going?" "To the Bahamas," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "Hugh got a nice bonus for quarterly sales, and we decided to treat ourselves for a whole week." I was silent, trying to digest the information. My daughter and her husband are going on a luxury vacation, not taking the time to visit me after being sick, without even asking how I'm feeling now. "Mom, are you still here?" "Yes," I answered quietly. "Have a nice rest." "Thank you," she exclaimed, clearly not catching the sarcasm in my voice. "I'll call you when we get back." I slowly hung up the phone and sat down in the chair by the window. Outside the window was spring, bright, lush, full of life. A young couple with a stroller strolled down the street. A neighbor's boy was racing his bicycle. Life went on, buzzing around, and I was frozen in my cocoon of loneliness and bitter thoughts. And at that moment, the decision that had been maturing in me since the night of my illness finally took shape. I will no longer wait for attention and care from a daughter who has long since lived her own life. I will no longer cling to a house that has witnessed my loneliness. I would start anew. The next morning, I called Lawrence Bridge, a realtor I knew from my days in court. Unlike Hugh, Lawrence was an old-school man, honest and straightforward. He arrived the same day, inspected the house, and without any guile told me how much I could get on the sale. "It's a very good price you need," he said, sipping the tea I offered him. The neighborhood has become prestigious, and your house, though in need of some repairs, has retained its charm. It's the kind of place that's worth a lot of money these days. How quickly can we make a deal? I asked bluntly. Lawrence looked at me carefully over his glasses. Did something happen to you? No, I shook my head. It was just time for a change. I understand, he nodded, though he didn't really understand. If the buyer's willing to pay outright, without a mortgage, we could be done in a week and a half. I have a couple of clients who are looking for a house in this neighborhood. Great, I smiled. Then let's start the process. Over the next 2 days, I signed all the necessary documents, and Lawrence, true to his word, found a buyer. A young couple willing to pay even more than the asking price to move in as soon as possible. They fell in love with your garden, Lawrence told me over the phone. Especially the old apple tree. They say they can already imagine their children swinging on the swings under it. A slight sadness came over me. Long ago, Edgar had made a swing for Violet in that very apple tree. She spent hours there, swinging to the heavens or just sitting with a book in her hands in the shade of the thick crown. I wondered if I should tell Violet about it before I sold the house, but I pushed the thought away. She'd made her choice, now I was making mine. By the end of the week, just as Violet and Hugh were about to leave for their vacation, all the papers were signed and the money was deposited into my account. Lawrence warned the new owners that I would have the house vacated in a week, in time for their return from the Bahamas. Are you sure you'll be there in time, Enid? He asked. I can arrange for help with packing and moving. Don't worry, Lawrence, I replied. I'll be fine. That same day, I hired a team of movers and ordered a storage container. I decided to keep most of the furniture. It was old and had a lot of memories, but I wanted a fresh start in my new life. I would keep only the most valuable things: photos, letters, a few family heirlooms. I spent the next 5 days taking the house apart. Every room, every closet, every drawer held the story of my life. I found things long forgotten. Notes from Edgar, Violet's childhood drawings, my wedding dress, neatly packed in a special case. Some finds brought a smile, others tears. But with each box, with each thing sorted, I felt the past letting go of me and the future becoming more real. On the 6th day, the house was practically empty. All that remained was to write a note for Violet and Hugh. I thought long and hard about what to say. I didn't want to blame or make excuses. I just wanted to explain my decision and put a stop to it. Finally, I sat down at the old kitchen table, the only piece of furniture that hadn't been taken away yet, and began to write. Dear Violet, and Hugh, if you're interested, by the time you read this letter, I will no longer be here. I have sold the house and am starting a new life elsewhere. Don't come looking for me. I'm not missing or kidnapped or crazy from old age. I just made a decision I should have made a long time ago. A few weeks ago, when I was sick with a high fever and you, Violet, chose your husband's party over your own mother's help, I realized one simple truth. I am alone, and I will be alone as long as I cling to the illusion of our relationship. All my life I've tried to be a good mother. I may not have always succeeded, but I did the best I could. I supported you, I cheered you on, I was there for you through the tough times. But at some point, I didn't become your mom. I became a burden. Or worse, an obstacle to the home and the money you thought was rightfully yours. I'm not mad, I'm not. I'm just tired of expecting attention and care that isn't going to happen. Tired of waking up to an empty house and going to sleep thinking that if something happened to me, no one would notice. The house was sold, the money was received. It was my money, Violet. My house that your father and I bought long before you were born, and I used it as I saw fit. Don't worry, I didn't stay on the street and give it all away. I have a roof over my head and a livelihood. The rest is not your concern. If ever you just want to talk, not about money, not about the house, but just about life as a daughter and mother, you know my phone number. Love, your mother. I reread the note several times. The words seemed right, honest, but not cruel. I folded the piece of paper in half and placed it on the windowsill by the front door, the first place Violet usually looked when she entered the house. That evening, the truck came to pick up the last boxes and table. The house was finally empty. I stood in the middle of the living room where I'd lived most of my life and felt a strange mixture of feelings: sadness, relief, fear of the unknown, and freedom. The next morning, I went around the rooms one last time, checking to see if I had forgotten anything. The bedroom I'd once shared with Edgar, Violet's nursery, the kitchen where we'd gathered for dinner every night. Memories filled the empty spaces, but they didn't weigh on me anymore. Goodbye, I whispered, closing the front door. I stuck the note in the gap between the door and the jamb so that it would be visible but not fall out. Then I hung the keys on the little hook next to the door for the new owners, who were supposed to get their own keys from Lawrence in 2 days. A cab was waiting for me at the gate. The driver, a young man with a friendly smile, helped me with my suitcase. To the bus station? He asked, starting the engine. Yes, please, I replied, taking one last look at the house through the back window. The bus to the coast was leaving in an hour. I had time to drink coffee in a small cafe across from the station and think about my decision. But there was no longer any doubt. At 74, I was beginning a new chapter of my life. Violet and Hugh returned from the Bahamas 3 days after I left, tanned, rested, and full of impressions. They came straight from the airport to see me, not to check in, but to show off their photos and give me a fridge magnet. The cab stopped in front of the house, and Violet noticed something was wrong. The curtains were open, but there were no lights on, even though it was getting dark. Mama must be asleep, she said to Hugh, taking out her keys. But the door wouldn't open. Her key no longer fit the lock. Violet frowned, rang the doorbell. There was no answer. Something's wrong, she muttered, starting to panic. Then she noticed a white piece of paper sticking out of the doorframe. Violet pulled it out, unfolded it, and began to read. Her face grew paler with each line. When she reached the end, her hands were trembling. What is it? Hugh asked, taking the note from her. He ran his eyes quickly over the text. Has she sold the house? Without our knowledge? How could she? She had the right, Violet whispered. The house was in her name only. But what now? Where has she gone? Where are all our things? Hugh was torn between rage and bewilderment. Violet looked at the empty house of her childhood and couldn't believe she would never enter it again. She would never walk up the familiar stairs, never look in her former room. We have to find her, Hugh said firmly. She couldn't just disappear. But Violet knew her mother had done exactly what she'd written about, started a new life without her, and for the first time in years, she felt not irritation, not annoyance, but a real fear of loss. Only now, standing in front of the closed door of her home, she realized that she had already lost something much more valuable than real estate. The salty sea breeze hit my face as soon as I stepped off the bus. Sizarock, a small coastal town 3 hours from Wheatland, greeted me with the sound of waves and seagulls. I stood at the bus station, clutching the handle of my suitcase and looking around with slight excitement and anticipation. I had never been to Sizarock before and had chosen it at random, looking at accommodation options on the internet. It was a small resort town of just over 5,000 people, with neat streets running down to the ocean and pastel-colored houses. It's the perfect place to make a fresh start. Can I help you with your luggage, ma'am? Asked a young man in a bus station attendant's uniform. Yes, thank you, I smiled. I need a cab to the Seabreeze. Ah, Mrs. Polanski's hotel, he nodded, hailing a cab. Good choice, right on the waterfront. 15 minutes later, I was settling into a small but cozy room overlooking the ocean. White curtains fluttered in the breeze, sunlight playing on the blue-painted walls. Simple wooden furniture, a bouquet of wildflowers on the table, and pictures of local scenery on the walls made the room feel like home. The hostess, Eleanor Polanski, a woman about my age with short gray hair and lively brown eyes, personally escorted me to the room. Make yourself comfortable, dear, she said, opening the window even wider. Dinner is at 7 o'clock, but if you're tired, I can bring it up to your room. No, I'll be down, I hastened to assure her. I don't want to turn into a hermit right away. Eleanor laughed. That's the right attitude. Everyone knows each other in our town, and new faces are always interesting, so get ready to ask questions at dinner. Left alone, I laid out my things, showered, and sat in a chair by the window, looking out at the vast ocean. The waves lapped against the sandy shore with a hypnotic rhythm, the sun slowly slipping toward the horizon, coloring the water golden. Had I really done it? Dropped everything and left? At my age? Suddenly, fear gripped me. What if I made a mistake? What if I couldn't settle in? What if I got sick and there was no one around to help me? But then I remembered the night Violet hadn't come, when I'd been running a fever, alone and forgotten in my own house. Would it have been different there? Wasn't I lonely even with a daughter in the same town? No, I did the right thing, I said out loud, as if trying to convince myself. At 7 o'clock, I went down to the small dining room on the first floor. A few tables were already occupied, mostly by elderly couples and single guests my age or older. Eleanor waved me over from the front desk and pointed to a vacant table by the window. "This is your seat, Enid," she said as she approached me. "Ocean view, just like we agreed." "Thank you, Eleanor, you're very thoughtful." "How long will you be staying with us?" she asked, pouring me a cup of tea. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "I've rented a room for a month to start with, and then we'll see." "Are you looking for a place to stay permanently?" I nodded. "That's right, something small, preferably with an ocean view. Do you know if there's anything around here?" Eleanor thought for a moment. Then her face brightened. "Actually, I do. Mrs. Higgins, an old friend of mine, recently moved in with her daughter in Portland. Her house is empty now, and she's thinking of renting or selling it. It's a 10-minute walk from here, right by the water. It's small, but very cozy." "Sounds perfect." I felt hope stirring in my chest. "Could you put me in touch with her?" "Of course, darling. I'll call her tomorrow." Dinner passed in a pleasant atmosphere. As Eleanor had predicted, the other guests took a keen interest in me. Mr. Jenkins, a former fishing boat captain who now spent his days teaching tourists the art of fishing, was particularly talkative. "And what brings you to our scissor rock, Mrs. Trimble?" he asked as he poured himself a second helping of mashed potatoes. I thought for a moment, not knowing how much to say. "I wanted a change of scenery," I said. "I'd always wanted to live by the ocean." "And you did the right thing," he exclaimed. "There's nothing like waking up to the sound of the surf. You'll see, in a week you won't be able to imagine living without it." That night I went to bed with a light heart. The sound of the waves outside the window was soothing, and the thought of a possible new home filled me with optimism. The next few days flew by. I explored the city, walked along the waterfront, and got to know the locals. Caesarrock turned out to be exactly as I had imagined it, calm, cozy, with a measured rhythm of life. On the third day, Eleanor said that she had contacted Mrs. Higgins and she agreed to show me her house. "She can't come herself, but she gave me the keys," Eleanor said. "If you want, we can go there tonight." Mrs. Higgins's house was a small blue and white cottage on a small hill above the ocean. A tiny garden with flowering rose bushes, a wooden terrace overlooking the vast water, and cozy rooms soaked in sunlight and sea air. "It's perfect," I whispered, standing on the terrace and looking out at the ocean. "The furniture stays if you want it," Eleanor said. Jean had only taken her personal belongings with her anyway, and the price? She quoted a price that was more than reasonable, especially with the money from the sale of my house in Wheatland. "I'll take it," I said firmly. "Can we do the paperwork now?" A week later, I was moving my few belongings into my new home. Small, but it was mine. With a terrace where I could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset, a small garden where I planned to grow flowers and herbs, a kitchen with enough room for just one person, and it was exactly what I needed. My new life was beginning, and I felt strangely young despite my 74 years. It was as if the weight of the past had been left behind. In Wheatland, and here in Scissor I could just be Enid, not someone's mother or ex-wife, but myself. While I was settling into my new place in Wheatland, Violet was trying to find me. She called my few friends, former court colleagues, even neighbors, but no one knew where I'd gone, or didn't want to say. "Mom couldn't just disappear," shouted Violet into the phone to Lawrence Bridge, the realtor who was handling the sale of the house. "You must know where she went." "Mrs. Pell," Lawrence replied calmly, "your mother is a capable adult. She had every right to sell her property and leave without accounting to anyone, including you." "But what if something happened to her?" Violet persisted. "What if she needs help?" "Believe me, she's doing fine," Lawrence said dryly and hung up. Hugh was furious. He had expected that sooner or later the house would go to them, and now those plans were ruined. "She did it on purpose. he said, pacing the living room. To spite us, to disinherit us. That's not the point, Violet said quietly, rereading my note, which she now carried with her everywhere she went. The point is that we weren't there for her when she needed us. Oh, come on, Hugh snorted. She's being dramatic. So what if we didn't show up once when she had the flu? That's no reason to sell the house and disappear. But Violet knew it wasn't about one time. It was the last straw after years of neglect. She remembered all the times she'd canceled meetings with her mother because of work or plans with Hugh, all the times she hadn't called me back, or asked how I was doing, or offered to help. And now, having lost me, she was finally beginning to realize that she had lost something far more valuable than a house or an inheritance. Meanwhile, I continued to settle into my new place. Each day brought new discoveries and acquaintances. I made friends with Eleanor, who started to come over for a cup of tea in the afternoon. I got to know my neighbors, an elderly couple, Doris and Herbert Rogers, who lived across the street and often invited me to barbecues in their garden. I met other settlers, people like me, who had chosen Rock for a new chapter in their lives. One of these was Norman Holt, a former literature teacher who had moved to Rock after retirement. A tall, trim man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and attentive blue eyes. We met at the local library where I was looking for gardening books. Are you new? He asked, noticing my uncertainty as I navigated the shelves. Yeah, I moved in a couple weeks ago, I replied. I'm still trying to get my bearings. Welcome to Rock. He held out his hand. Norman Holt. I've been here 5 years, so you could say I'm almost a local. We talked about books, the town, life by the ocean. Norman turned out to be an interesting conversationalist, well-read, with a good sense of humor, a little old-fashioned in his manners. If you're interested, we have a book club, he said before we left. We meet every Tuesday at the Starfish Cafe. Nothing formal, just discussing what we've read and drinking too much coffee. Sounds like fun, I smiled. Maybe I'll stop by. That evening, sitting on my terrace with a cup of tea and watching the sun sink into the ocean, I reflected on the past and the future. About my whole life in Wheatland, the years I'd spent with Edgar, Violet, and her childhood, my job at the courthouse, the house that was no longer mine. Was my departure an escape? Maybe. But sometimes running away is the only way to save yourself. I wasn't running from responsibility or problems. I was running from emptiness, from being alone among the people who should have been closest to me. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, I thought of Violet. I wondered if she was looking for me. Is she worried? Does she realize now that she's lost me? Or is she just angry that I robbed her of her expected inheritance? My phone was still the same, but it was silent. No calls, no messages. Maybe Violet didn't want to make the first move, or maybe she just decided I wasn't worth the effort. Either way, I wasn't going to call first. It was her choice to seek me out or not. My new life was just beginning, and I was determined to live it my way. At 74, I was finally free of expectations, of disappointment, of the oppressive feeling that I owed someone something. And every morning, waking up to the sound of the surf and the cries of seagulls, I thanked fate for this chance. A chance to start over, even when everyone around me said it was too late. In Wheatland, Violet continued her search. She'd hired a private investigator, but he'd given her the runaround. I'd never used a credit card, never left a digital trail. It's like I disappeared. She doesn't want to be found, the detective said, returning the deposit. And I have to respect her decision. Violet sat in her and Hugh's living room, looking at the picture of us together. She, a little girl with pigtails, and me, a young mother with a happy smile. Where had that time gone? When did they stop being a family? I'll find you, Mom, she whispered, running her finger over the photo. And this time I'll do it right. It had been 2 months since I'd moved to Rock. June had been warm and sunny. My little garden bloomed under my caring hands as I planted dahlias and asters, lavender and rosemary. Every morning I woke up at first light, made tea, and went out on the terrace to enjoy the ocean view. That day, there was no sign of change. I had returned from a book club meeting where we had discussed Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. The conversation was lively. Norman was as erudite as ever, and I even dared to argue with him about Eleanor Dashwood's motives. When I entered the house, I put my book bag on the table and went into the kitchen to prepare dinner. The sound of the surf and the cries of seagulls came through the open window. I was chopping vegetables for a salad when I heard a knock on the door. Strange, I wasn't expecting anyone. Maybe it was Eleanor stopping by for a cup of tea or Doris bringing fresh baked goods. Wiping my hands on a kitchen towel, I headed for the door. When I opened it, I froze in place. Violet stood on the doorstep. We stared at each other for long seconds, not saying a word. She looked tired, with shadows under her eyes that even light makeup couldn't hide. She was wearing a simple summer dress, not the expensive outfits she was used to. Her hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was simply pinned up in a ponytail. "Mom," she finally said quietly. "Violet," I gripped the doorknob tighter. "How did you find me?" She grinned bitterly. "It wasn't easy. I called every seaside town within a 500-kilometer radius. I asked about an older woman who had recently bought or rented a house overlooking the ocean. Finally got lucky. A woman at a real estate agency in Sizarock remembered a deal on Mrs. Higgins's house." I nodded. Of course, it wasn't Eleanor who was handling the deal, but a local realtor. I should have seen it coming. "Come in," I said, stepping back from the door. Violet crossed the threshold cautiously, as if she expected me to change my mind and slam the door in her face. Her gaze slid to the living room, small but cozy, with a couch, bookshelves, and paintings by local artists on the walls. "It's nice," she said, clearly choosing her words. "I'm glad you like it," I replied dryly. "Would you like some tea?" "Yes, thank you." We went into the kitchen. I put the kettle on and took out the cups, trying not to let the trembling in my hands show. Violet sat down at the small kitchen table, arms folded awkwardly in front of her. "Does Hugh know you're here?" I asked, breaking the long silence. "No." She shook her head. I told him I was going to a friend's house for the weekend." "I see." We were silent again. The kettle boiled and I made tea and put the cups on the table. We sat opposite each other, mother and daughter, strangers. "Why did you come, Violet?" I asked at last. She looked up from the cup. "To see you, to make sure you were all right." "I'm fine. As you can see, I'm alive and well and quite comfortable." "Mom," her voice trembled, "why didn't you tell me you were leaving? Why did you just disappear?" I stared at her for a long time, gathering my thoughts. So many things had accumulated over the years. Resentments, disappointments, unspoken words. "Would you listen to me?" I finally asked. "Have you ever listened to me, Violet? Not what you thought I was going to say, but what I was actually saying?" She flinched as if from a slap. "That's not fair." "Maybe," I shrugged. "But it's true. You stopped seeing me as a person a long time ago, Violet. I was either a nuisance or a source of potential gain for you, not a mother who needs her daughter." "That is not true." She raised her voice. "I loved you. I love you." "Love isn't about words, Violet." I shook my head. "Love is about actions. It's being there for you when you need to be. It's not just calling when you need something from me. It's remembering my birthday not after the fact. It's coming over when I'm sick, instead of going to my husband's party." Her face contorted in pain. "That night? With the flu. It was a mistake, Mom. I should have come, I know. But Hugh had important clients. A lot depended on that meeting." "It's not about that night," I interrupted her. "That night was just the last straw. The final proof that I was all alone, even though I had a daughter." We were silent again. Violet lowered her eyes, and I stared out the window at the ocean stretching to the horizon. It was strange. I'd lived my whole life away from the sea, and now I couldn't imagine living without it. "Mom," Violet spoke again, her voice quieter, "I know I haven't been the best daughter. I know I've put my own interests ahead of yours too often, but I want to make it right. That's why I'm here." "And how do you envision that fixing?" I asked with a touch of irony. "Go back to Wheatland," she said, stepping forward. "Hugh and I bought a new house and there's a room for you, or if you want, we can help you find an apartment nearby. I'll visit you every day, I promise." I looked at my daughter and couldn't believe my ears. After everything that had happened, she still didn't understand. "Violet," I said softly but firmly, "I'm not going back to Wheatland. Not to you and Hugh. not to your separate apartment. My life is here now. But mother, she looked genuinely surprised. There's no one here. You're all alone. I am not alone, I objected. I already have friends. I'm in a book club. I help out at the local library. I tend to the garden. My life is full, Violet, perhaps for the first time in years. But I'm your daughter. Yes, you are my daughter, I nodded, and I will always love you. But that doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my happiness and peace for the illusion of a family relationship. Violet looked confused. She'd obviously expected a different conversation, a different reaction. Perhaps she thought I would weep with joy when I saw her, that I would throw myself into her arms, that I would gratefully accept her offer to return. But I had changed. Those 2 months in Scissor Rock have changed me more than the years in Wheatland. You sold our house, she said bitterly. The house where I grew up, without even telling me. It was my house, Violet, I corrected her. Mine and your father's. And I had every right to use it as I saw fit. You did it to spite Hugh and me? No, I shook my head. I did it for me. To start a new life. A life where I wouldn't be just an old mother waiting for her daughter's rare visits. Violet stood up from the table, her hands trembling. You've changed, Mother. I don't recognize you. I haven't changed, Violet. I've just finally allowed myself to be me. No more guilt, no more trying to please, no more fear of being alone. Because I was already alone, even living next to you. She walked through the small kitchen, stopped at the window, looking out at the ocean. Her shoulders slumped. What am I going to do, Mom? She asked quietly. I really want to make things right. I walked over to her and put my hand on her shoulder for the first time in the whole conversation. Live your life, Violet. Be happy with Hugh, grow your career. And if you ever want to just talk to me not about money, not about the house, not that I should come back, but just as a daughter to a mother, I'll always be glad to hear you out. That's it? She turned to me, tears glistening in her eyes. You're just give up on me? No, darling, I smiled softly. I'm not giving up on you. I just stop expecting from you what you can't or won't give. And I'm starting to live for myself. After all, at my age, that's not such a bad idea. We went out on the terrace. The day was drawing toward evening, and the sun was slowly sinking toward the horizon, coloring the ocean with golden hues. We sat in wicker chairs, watching the waves crashing against the shore. It's really beautiful here. Violet broke the silence. I never realized you dreamed of living by the ocean. There's a lot you didn't know about me, Violet, I said without reproach, just stating the fact. Because I never asked. She nodded, accepting the bitter truth. Tell me now, what do you do here? Who are your new friends? What do you like to do? And I did. About Eleanor and her hotel, about the Rogerses and their weekend barbecues, about the book club and Norman and his encyclopedic knowledge of literature, about my little garden and my plans for the future. Violet listened attentively, occasionally asking questions, and gradually the tension between us began to subside. Not completely gone, there was too much unspoken and unforgiven, but less palpable. Will you stay the night? I asked when the sun was almost over the horizon. There's a bed in the guest bedroom. Thank you, but no. Violet shook her head. I've taken a room at the hotel on the waterfront, and I have a return bus tomorrow morning. I understand, I nodded. We sat in silence for a while longer, then Violet stood up. I should go. It's getting chilly. I walked her to the door. She turned around awkwardly, as if she didn't know how to say goodbye. Could I call you? She asked uncertainly. Of course. I smiled. I'd be happy to. She made a movement as if she wanted to hug me, but stopped, unsure of my reaction. I stepped toward her and hugged her briefly but tightly. Take care of yourself, Violet. You too, Mom. I stood on the doorstep watching her walk down the path to the wicket, a small figure in the twilight, my daughter, who was finally beginning to realize that I was not just her mother, but a person with her own wants and needs. Closing the door, I returned to the terrace. The stars were already beginning to appear in the darkening sky, the first lights on in the houses on the coast. I thought about our conversation, about all that had been said and not said. I was under no illusions. One conversation couldn't undo years of estrangement. Violet would return to Wheatland, to Hugh and her life. Perhaps at first she would call often, mindful of her promise to make things right. But then the calls would become less frequent, and then perhaps stop altogether. And that was okay. I no longer built my life around expectations of my daughter. I had my little house by the ocean, my new friends, my books, and my garden. It was enough. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night, replaying the conversation with Violet in my head. It was bittersweet to realize that we had become such strangers to each other. But at the same time, I felt strangely relieved that I'd finally said all the things I'd been saving up for years. In the morning, when I went out into the garden to water the flowers, I could see the silhouettes of fishing boats on the horizon. A new day was beginning, and I was ready to face it, with all its joys and sorrows, opportunities and challenges. My new life was continuing, and now I knew I had made the right choice. 6 months flew by. My little house by the ocean no longer seemed new. It became a real home steeped in my habits, my tastes, my life. I arranged books on the shelves, hung pictures on the walls, turned a tiny room on the second floor into a mini workshop where I did watercolors, a hobby I'd always dreamed of but never had time for in Wheatland. Sizerok took me in as his own. I already knew all the vendors at the local market, greeted my neighbors by name, and had a favorite spot at the Starfish Cafe where our book club met every Tuesday. It was almost 6 months after Violet's visit. As I expected, she called often at first, once a week, sometimes more often. We talked about the weather, my garden, her work, carefully avoiding painful topics. Then the calls became less frequent, once a fortnight, then once a month. Not because she had forgotten about me, but simply because life went on as it was, and we each had our own way to go. That afternoon, I returned from my morning walk on the beach, a habit I'd picked up in Sizerok. Nothing invigorates better than the sea air and the sound of the surf in the early morning. There were several envelopes in the mailbox by the gate, bills, advertisements for the local supermarket, and a letter from Violet. A letter from Violet. I didn't open it right away. I made tea first, sat down on the terrace, and then carefully opened the envelope. My daughter's handwriting, smooth and neat, filled several pages. "Dear Mother," she wrote, "I have been gathering my thoughts for a long time before writing this letter. Our telephone conversations are always so superficial, as if we were afraid to touch on something important, afraid to accidentally destroy the fragile peace that has been established between us. But there are things I have to say, things that are easier to write than to say out loud. I want to apologize to you for all the years I took you for granted, when I thought you'd always be there for me, always sacrificing your interests for mine, when I thought only of myself, ignoring your needs and desires. I especially want to apologize for the night you were sick and I didn't come. There's no excuse for what I did, even though I tried to convince myself at the time that Hugh's party was really important to his career. The truth is, I just didn't want to go. It was late, I was tired after work, and it was easier to tell myself that you'll manage on your own than to fulfill my filial duty. A lot has changed since you left Wheatland, Hugh and I. Things have not been smooth sailing between us. He's still angry about selling the house, thinks you cheated us. And for the first time in years, I've started to look at our relationship from the outside and wonder if I really want to spend the rest of my life with him. But that's my problem, and I'm not going to take it out on you. I just wanted you to know that your leaving has made me rethink a lot of things in my life. I'm not asking you to come back. I realize now that you have a right to your own happiness, to your own life. And from what we've talked about, you found that happiness in Sizerok. I just want you to know that I love you, Mom. I always have, even when I didn't show it. And I'm sorry it took your disappearance to make me realize how much you mean to me. Love, Violet." I reread the letter several times before folding it neatly and returning it to the envelope. A strange feeling swept over me. Not exactly forgiveness, but something close to it. The realization that Violet finally saw me not just as a mother, but as a person with her own wants and needs. I didn't answer right away. I decided to give myself and her time to digest what had been said and unspoken. Instead, I went to the town library, where I now volunteered 3 times a week. The Sizerok Library was small but cozy, an old building with high ceilings and huge windows overlooking the ocean. I helped with cataloging books, sometimes did readings for children, and lately I even started leading a watercolor painting class for seniors. Enid! Martha, the head librarian, exclaimed when I walked in. It's so good of you to come. We have a whole box of new arrivals to process. I'd love to, I smiled, taking off my cardigan. Working at the library brought me a joy I'd never experienced at Wheatland. Here I was valued not for being someone's mother or someone's wife, but for my own knowledge and skills. After the library, I went into the Starfish for coffee. Norman was already sitting at our usual table by the window, absorbed in reading some thick book. When he saw me, he put the book aside and got up to pull back a chair for me. Enid. He smiled his warm smile. I've already ordered your favorite latte. Thank you, Norman. I sat down across from him. What are you reading? Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude. He showed me the cover. This is the third time I've reread it, and each time I find something new. We talked about books, the latest city news, the upcoming seafood festival. Norman told funny stories from his teaching past, and I shared my experiences at the library. A warm, friendly relationship had developed between us that could have possibly grown into something more. But we both took our time, savoring every moment. When I got home that evening, I sat on the terrace for a long time, looking out at the ocean and thinking about Violet's letter, about how my life had changed in those 6 months, about the contrast between past and present. In Wheatland, every day was like the last. The empty house, the infrequent visits from my daughter, who came only when she needed something, the constant feeling that I should be grateful for even these crumbs of attention. I lived in anticipation, a call, a visit, some event that would break the monotony of existence. Here in Rock, every day was filled. Walking on the beach, working at the library, meeting new friends, painting, reading, just enjoying life. I was no longer waiting for someone to make me happy. I learned to create my own happiness on my own. The next day, I decided to answer Violet's letter after all. I sat down at the table in my little workshop, took out a piece of paper, and began to write. Dear Violet, thank you for your letter. It means a lot to me. I don't hold a grudge against you, dear. I never have. Yes, I've been hurt when you've put your own interests ahead of my needs time after time, but I realize it was partly my own fault. I taught you that Mom would always be there for you, always support you, always understand and forgive you, and you grew up believing that would always be the case. My leaving was not an attempt to punish you, but rather an act of self-preservation. At 74, I realized that if I didn't change my life now, I would spend the rest of my years alone, waiting for the occasional show of attention from you. Now, looking back, I don't regret my decision. Here in Rock, I found what I missed so much in Wheatland, a sense of belonging, a sense that my life had meaning and value. I made new friends. Eleanor, the owner of the inn where I stayed for the first time, the Rogers couple, my neighbors, who often invite me over for dinner, Martha from the library where I now volunteer, Norman, a retired literature professor with whom we spend a lot of time discussing books and art. I've started painting, watercolors, as I've always dreamed of doing. I even teach classes for other retired people at the local library. Can you believe your mom is a painting teacher? Who'd have thought it? My little house has become a real refuge. Sometimes, sitting on the terrace in the evening and looking out at the ocean, I think, why didn't I do this sooner? Why did I cling to the past for so long, to a relationship that brought more pain than joy? As for you and Hugh, I'm sorry you're having problems. But darling, you have to decide for yourself what's important in life, what you really want. Don't let anyone, not your husband, not your mother, not anyone, tell you how to live your life. Believe me, I know from my own experience how bitter it is to realize at the end of life that you lived not for yourself, but for others. I'm not asking you to come here, and I'm not promising to come back to Wheatland myself. I think we both need time and space to sort ourselves out, our wants and needs. But I want you to know that I will always love you, Violet. You're my daughter, and nothing will change that. And if ever you want to come just for fun, without discussing the past, without trying to win me back, my doors are always open to you. Love, your mother. I sealed the letter, scribbled the address, and set it aside to send in the morning. Then I took my sketchbook and paints and went out onto the terrace. The sun was already setting, coloring the ocean and sky in incredible shades of pink and gold, the perfect subject for a watercolor. As I painted, I thought about how strange life is. It took me 74 years to find myself, to realize that I am entitled to my own happiness, that I didn't have to sacrifice myself for others, not even for my own daughter. Late that night, the phone rang. It was Norman. "Enid, didn't wake you?" he asked in his deep, calm voice. "No, I hadn't gone to bed yet," I answered. "I was painting a sunset." "That's fine," he said, a smile in his voice. "Listen, tomorrow the Portland Symphony Orchestra is giving a concert in the city park. Outdoor classics. Would you like to keep me company?" I smiled. 6 months ago, I would have hesitated, wondering if Violet would call or decide to stop by. Now the answer was obvious. "I'd love to, Norman. What time?" "I'll pick you up at 6. We'll pick up a blanket and a picnic basket." "Sounds wonderful. See you tomorrow." I hung up the phone and went out on the terrace. The night was clear, the stars reflected in the dark ocean water. Somewhere in the distance, a lighthouse was blinking, measuring seconds, minutes, hours. Time that now belonged only to me. I thought about the contrast between my past life, full of self-sacrifice, and my current one, filled with fulfillment and tranquility. About how long I had lived for others, for my husband, for my daughter, for everyone but myself, and how unexpectedly liberating it was to decide to start living for myself. Violet's letter touched me, but it didn't change my decision to keep my distance. Not out of anger or resentment, but out of a realization that we both needed room to grow. Her to learn to appreciate what she has and realize what she really wants out of life. Me to keep building my new life without constantly looking back at the past. Maybe someday we'll be closer again. Maybe she'll come to visit, not to convince me to come back, but just to spend time together. Maybe we'll finally learn to see each other not as mother and daughter, bound by obligations and expectations, but as two separate people capable of mutual respect and understanding. But even if that didn't happen, I knew I would no longer live a life of waiting. My life here and now was full, vibrant, filled with new experiences and discoveries. And that in itself was the greatest gift I could give myself at 74. I closed the album with the unfinished watercolor and went back into the house. Tomorrow would be a new day with a walk on the beach, work at the library, a concert under the stars. And I was going to live it fully, without looking back or fearing the future. After all, isn't that what life is all about? Living each moment as if it were the most important? And I had finally learned this art, albeit at the end of my days,